This video will take you through how capitalism and socialism emerged, why they clashed, where they failed, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and why neither system ever worked the way it was promised in theory. Stay with us until the end as we explore how this great economic struggle throughout history has shaped the world we live in today. For more than 100 years, one argument has echoed louder and lasted longer than almost any other in modern history. An argument that outlived revolutions, reshaped continents, drained empires, and divided the planet into rival camps. For generations, capitalism and socialism were never just economic ideas. They were lines in the sand, and behind every patriotic speech, every labor strike, every market crash, and every proxy conflict, this debate quietly steered the course of the modern world. But here's the part almost no commentator ever acknowledges. Neither system actually behaved the way its supporters promised. Not in theory. Not in practice. Not in any nation, under any conditions. And when history delivered its harshest tests, war, famine, inflation, collapse, the truth emerged with unmistakable force. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and the past intersect and where nothing is ever as straightforward as it first appears. Our story begins long before the words capitalism or socialism were ever spoken. For most of human existence, there was no real economy in the modern sense. There was only survival. Kings ruled by divine justification. Landowners controlled nearly everything. Peasants worked simply to avoid starvation. Progress moved at a glacial pace, and for thousands of years, wealth was a zero-sum reality. If one group gained, another lost. Value came from land, labor, and conquest. Productivity barely changed. And the idea that ordinary people could grow wealthy through trade or innovation would have sounded completely irrational. Then the Industrial Revolution shattered that. World late 18th century, Britain became a pressurized engine of coal, iron, capital, and restless ambition. Machines replaced muscle. Factories overwhelmed small workshops, and a new, unprecedented force emerged, the power of private capital. For the first time in history, individuals could invest, speculate, and own at a scale previously reserved only for monarchs. Output surged. Wages rose for some, misery deepened for others, and inequality expanded at a pace no society had ever witnessed. Cities filled with smoke. Children labored in factories. Crowded slums spread disease. Yet however brutal it looked, one reality was impossible to ignore. Capitalism produced more goods, more wealth, and more speed than any system before it. And it was in reaction to this upheaval, not as a fantasy, but as a cry of resistance, that socialism was born. By the mid-1800s, thinkers such as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels examined the factories, the strikes, the poverty, and concluded that the problem was not individual grid, was the system itself. They argued that capitalist wealth was simply unpaid labor in disguise, that ownership by workers, shared profits, and production designed around human need rather than private reward could finally bring fairness to society. No more exploitation. No endless economic cycles. Instead, planned stability and equal dignity. 2 millions living beneath the crushing gears of early industrial capitalism. It sounded not just appealing, it sounded like justice. But theory operates on paper. Real life does not. The first large-scale attempt to build a socialist state did not arise from a peaceful academic experiment. It emerged from the wreckage of revolution. After 1917, Lenin inherited a nation exhausted, starving, and barely industrialized. The old ruling class vanished. The empire collapsed. And suddenly, a massive territory with millions of citizens needed an entirely new operating framework. The Soviet leadership created one: state ownership of land and industry, centralized control of prices and production, and the elimination of private enterprise. In theory, it promised equality and flawless coordination. In practice, it delivered confusion. Without markets, planners had no reliable signals about demand. Without competition, factories lacked innovation. Without personal incentives, workers met only the bare minimum. Shortages became routine. Queues became a way of life. Agriculture faltered, and famine spread. Even Lenin was eventually forced to retreat, reintroducing pockets of private trade just to prevent collapse. Yet despite those failures, socialism retained its appeal because capitalism was facing its own crisis. By the early 20th century, capitalism had created immense growth, but also staggering instability. Speculation soared. Corporate monopolies dominated entire industries. The wealthy lived in luxury, while millions barely survived. The system produced wealth efficiently, but distributed it poorly. The breaking point arrived in 1929, when financial markets imploded and capitalism suffered its greatest disaster, the Great Depression. Banks vanished overnight. Unemployment soared to historic levels. Entire national economies were devastated. For countless observers, capitalism no longer seemed flawed, it looked fatal. By the 1930s, the world was confronting an uncomfortable reality. Socialism promised equality, but delivered scarcity. While capitalism promised prosperity, but generated collapse, then came the turning point. World War II. The war forced every major nation to push its economic system to the breaking point. The Soviet Union mobilized with astonishing speed through total state control. Meanwhile, capitalist nations such as the United States transformed into industrial giants, demonstrating how private innovation could become unstoppable when supported by coordinated national effort. After the war, the world became a test laboratory. On one side, centralized planning and suppressed markets. On the other, regulated capitalism with social protections. And instead of theoretical arguments, real people lived the consequences. Early Soviet decades produced rapid industrialization and military strength. Literacy rose, cities expanded, but inefficiency grew beneath the surface. Factories hit quotas by producing useless goods. Farms failed. Innovation stalled. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union could launch rockets, yet struggled to produce reliable consumer products. Capitalist nations, meanwhile, adapted. Regulations were introduced. Safety nets were built. Banking protections and social programs emerged. Capitalism did not become just, but it became more stable. Adaptability became its greatest strategic advantage. By the 1980s, the contrast was unavoidable. Living standards in the West surged, while the Soviet economy stagnated. The Cold War was not decided by ideology. It was decided by performance. When the Berlin Wall fell, it was not bombs that defeated the Soviet system. It was inefficiency, shortages, and an economy unable to evolve. But capitalism's triumph was short-lived. In the 1990s and 2000s, transformed again. Finance expanded beyond anything earlier economists imagined. Global supply chains spread worldwide. Debt and speculation fueled new growth and new fragility. Inequality returned at historic levels. And in 2008, the global financial crisis exposed familiar weaknesses. Instability had never vanished, it had simply changed form, asterisk, at the same time. Softer versions of socialism resurfaced policies focused on redistribution, public services, and social equity. Younger generations, strained by rising costs and stagnant wages, began questioning whether capitalism still served the broader society. But this time, almost no one argued for ideological purity, because history had already delivered its verdict. Every major economy today is a hybrid. Markets and government. Incentives and protections. Innovation and restraint. Not because theories failed intellectually, but because human behavior forced compromise. Under capitalism, ambition becomes innovation, till it turns into exploitation. Under socialism, equality becomes solidarity, till it turns into repression. In markets, power concentrates through money. In planned systems, power concentrates through politics. The flaw is not the system alone, it is the human nature inside it. So the real question is not which model is morally superior. The real question is, which system can restrain power, correct mistakes, and reward useful behavior most effectively? History's answer is unmistakable. The system that adapts survives. Capitalism endured because it reinvented itself. Socialism collapsed where it refused to change and flourished only where it blended with markets. Winners were never chosen by ideology. They were chosen by flexibility, and now the debate is shifting once again. The challenges of the 21st century: artificial intelligence, climate risk, demographic decline, global debt do not respect ideology. They expose weaknesses on every side. The nations that succeed will be those that combine market innovation with public resilience, private creativity with collective stability. Because if the last century taught us anything, it is this: no economy functions without incentives, no society prospers without guardrails, and no nation survives when power, whether in corporations or governance, concentrates unchecked. The question was never truly capitalism versus socialism. The question has always been, who controls the levers inside the system? And as history repeatedly shows, power never disappears. It only moves. If this changed the way you look at economic history, subscribe for more. The past has the answers, and I will help you find them.